Lagos, Nigeria's biggest city and the destination for the Doctor and Belinda in this week's episode, The Story and the Engine. We're about to step into a world where stories have power, a tall tale about the tallest of tales. As always, this may contain spoilers. You have been warned, but if you would like to step into the spider's web, then please come and join me as we go beyond the sofa. I am actually very excited about this. Now, you should understand that I'm not actually recording this after I've watched the episode. So this little bit has been recorded before the episode, and then I'm going to watch the episode and come back. So in about an hour's time, you'll get well, it's not an hour to you. It's a couple of minutes. I'm not explaining this well. So what I'm recording now is before I've watched the episode. And right now I don't know anything about the story. But there's been a lot of clues. There's been a lot of talk about this being connected with story and stories that have power. And that's always something that's interested me right from possibly the first time I experienced that idea with Terry Pratchett's Discworld. And I've always thought that stories have power anyway. And so to have something that then imbues the story with a more mystical, magical, possibly physical ability, I think that's quite an interesting concept. But before we go into that, let's have a quick chat about ratings. Now, I've been doing this every week and I said everything I think I need to say about ratings overall. So let's just go with the current figures that we have and the overnights and things like that. So we got overnights of 1.58 million. With the 7 days, we were up to 2.91 million. And then the plus fours gave us 3.23 million for the well. And to be honest, it's not bad. Probably what we should be expecting at this point. The Well was actually one of the better episodes, and I'm hoping that some people would have caught up with that who may not have watched the previous episodes in the series. So maybe we'll see a bit of a jump later in the series. As it is, Lucky Day only got an overnight of 1.5 million, which honestly is a bit disappointing for what was a good episode, but it's not outside the realms of what we should be expecting right now for this particular series. Yeah, there's the caveat that we're never going to get 10 million viewers that we previously might have got. But the fact that Doctor Who was behind programs like Casualty on the night doesn't really bode well for the series. In fact, the BBC overall were less than 2 million viewers at every point on Saturday night, so it's not good. That's just in terms of viewing figures, of course. We don't know what else is going to come into play. People are talking about, renewing the series or things like that, but we shouldn't be talking about that right now because we don't know enough. Okay, so before actually starting to talk about the story, I just want to say something about the writer. And what we have here on face value is somebody who hasn't really done anything science fiction, fantasy-wise before, but that might not strictly be true. As well as previously stating he was a Doctor Who fan, a lot of his previous work has had a lot of elements of speculative fiction in it. So from blending in mythologies or employing magical realism, even dealing with, fairy tale. So for a writer to write what I expect we're about to see feels kind of right. It feels like it's the sort of thing that he probably should be writing. And this is why I'm excited about this episode, because when you hear about a new writer for a show like Doctor Who, you want them to embody all of those things that have made the series really great in the past. And with Inua Ellams, I'm so sorry, I butcher these names every week. It seems that we've got somebody who embodies that. So I'm very interested to see what he comes up with. So, what did we actually get with the story and the engine? It's a very good episode of Doctor Who. The pacing and the structure of the story feels coherent and contained. And yet, when you're doing a story about stories, you think there's going to be more room to play around with the genre a bit, but in actual fact, there isn't, because everything you say about story is something that the audience can pick up on and apply unfavourably to your piece. So you've really got to be a bit careful about the line that you draw there. It's a difficult area to cover, and yet I think it's done very well here. I like the fact that we're not really dealing with the gods, but rather with somebody who has affected the gods. Essentially, we have a Promethean figure in the Barber, and that worked really well. Now, before I go too far into this, I thought this was very good, but I did think that there was one central flaw that did draw me out of the episode a couple of points. But we'll get to that a little bit later. The story in the engine finds the Doctor travelling to Lagos for the first time in what is assumed to be quite a while. We hear of the barber shop, a place that he feels at home. And in other hands, this could have felt a little bit clunky and a little bit contrived, because he does talk about being in this black body for the first time and not being accepted, which it's a very basic reading of that speech. And it basically gives you the wrong idea. And I think, they're not commenting purely on identity here. What's happening here is that the Doctor is describing the place that he has found, which is an analogue to his home. He doesn't have a planet anymore. He doesn't have a people. What he has is this barber shop, and it's a place to go. It's a place to be himself. It's a very interesting point of the story, and it's almost central to the story as well. The fact that this isn't just a shop that's been invaded. Ultimately, it's essentially the Doctor's home. It's his heart. And really, this isn't just a commentary on one person finding their place in the world, or at least a place in the world. What it is kind of a focus on mental health, and in particular men's mental health, which is something that isn't talked about an awful lot. And these barbershops, they're at the heart of communities. They're so important to the well-being of individuals. And that's why it's important. It's not just a shop. It's not just the people who are in the shop. In fact, later in the episode, one of the characters says about the shop taking the select few of its customers. It's the whole community that these shops represent that makes them so important. But let's talk about those characters for a second, because as important as they are, we don't actually find out a lot about them. Now, previously I've said that some of the characters in this current run of Doctor Who have seemed very one-dimensional, very archetypical, very stereotypical. And what we get here isn't a million miles away from that. But the way that they're handled is a lot different. We find out who they are. We find out the one thing that brought them there, the reason that they're trapped in this particular place. But beyond that, we really don't know that much about them. And in a different story, that could have been a problem. Previously, when I've talked about this phenomenon, this, stereotype and archetype being used instead of character, and that character being so important for the story, it's usually because of the character's importance. In this case, we get in and we get out. We understand who the character is through a particular flaw or thing. Well, there's one guy who's an athlete and he wanted to be part of the team, and so he went to get a haircut. And there's one guy who's a father and it was his son's naming day, and so he went to get a haircut. It was an important thing to do.
I came to get a trim for my child's naming ceremony. My wife. We've been married for less than a year.
And we learn who they are and what their stakes are, why they came there in the first place, they went there in the first place. And interestingly, those stakes don't just give you the reason why they needed to get a haircut in the first place. They also give you the reason why they need to leave the barbershop as well. It's very cleverly done to give you a light character, something that doesn't have a lot of heft to it, but yet is perfectly placed within the story. It's different to what we've been seeing before, where these bigger characters that are massive parts of the story, which should have that narrative heft added to them, and don't. So the Doctor travels back to his home and then essentially finds out that he's trapped in his home. And this is where we get into the one bit of the story that didn't quite work for me, and that's his relationship with Omo. Because at its heart, we know that what the Doctor's like with people. We've seen that over decades. But here, the Doctor chooses to go to Lagos. The Doctor chooses to go back to the barbershop. And yet when he ends up being trapped in the barbershop, he blames Omo for it, for calling him there, essentially, which he didn't do. And that part of it, the tension, it's really important to have that dramatic tension between characters, but it doesn't feel earned here. Because actually, Omo didn't do anything. He was hoping that the Doctor would come, but that's not an action towards. That's a pretty... It's a passive voice at the end of the day. So whilst I really enjoy the acting in this bit, the drama, the tension and all of that, I don't buy the story. I don't buy that storyline. And that's really important too. It's a fundamental part of the episode, and yet it is fundamentally flawed. And it could have been something that was picked up, and it could have been something so easy to deal with a quick switch to Omo pressing a button and it happening to be something that calls the Doctor, something like that. To give Omo the agency that the Doctor is then placing on him later in the episode, it just would have made things a little bit more coherent. And actually, that's the only real criticism I have about the episode overall. One of the things that struck me about this episode is that the production values are incredible. It's not just in the realization of Lagos, but also the barber shop. And the barber shop later in the episode, where they go through the maze at the end and they discover all the things that have been squirreled away over the years. And the story engine itself, everything felt coherent, and the production values seemed to tie everything together. You know, the sets felt like you were stepping into not just the barbershop, but almost into this extra-dimensional space. Where we saw the advert for the first time, and we saw the giant spider machine creature for the first time, I wasn't actually sure what we'd be getting. The idea that this character would end up being a Nancy wasn't outside the realms of possibility. It felt like that it was something that could happen, and indeed, this kind of bait and switch that they got between the barber saying, "I am all of these gods," and then the Doctor going, "No, you're not, because we've met all of these gods." That was quite a nice twist, I thought. These things can easily feel unearned, but because of where we are with the show, it actually felt really on point. And I quite liked the way that instead of being these gods, these characters, that we have explored the Doctor meeting gods before, we end up with a story of a mortal. It's a very personal story. A mortal who brought stories to the gods. It's analogous to Prometheus bringing fire to man. It's a tale as old as time, and that concept fits in so well with a story that plays with the whole concept of stories. And then we have Albina, the daughter of the spider god, somebody who the Doctor has run into before in a previous incarnation. And this is where we get that big reveal of Joe Martin, the Fugitive Doctor, being the Doctor that this character had met before. And that was nice. It's nice to be able to tie the Fugitive Doctor back to the timeline of the Doctor. It's nice that the Doctor has those memories and can call on them if and when he needs to. It's also nice that we're seeing consequences of his actions, and that all leads to the central premise that pushes the resolution. The idea that the Doctor, who's led all of these lives, is uniquely the person who can use all of that energy to overload the story machine. On a different show, it just wouldn't have worked. And let's face it, this isn't the first time that we've seen the Doctor do something like this before. But it works here. This is one of those moments where I think that you can forgive a series like Doctor Who for retreading the same old ground. It will have to. It's a show that's got 60 years of history. It's going to have to do the same things more than once occasionally. But at least on this instance, it's doing it in a very specific way at some very specific points. And we always knew that the Doctor had to be the force that stopped the engine. And what I like about this is actually we don't get a God in the machine type engine, which we've seen so many times in instances with gods in this universe, or where extra dimensional beings are involved. Instead, we have the Doctor, because of who he is and because of what he's done and all the lives that he's led, so many stories that it overpowers the thing that is meant to extract the stories. And that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. It gives us a really nice moment where we get to see various different incarnations of the Doctor on screen. And I think possibly it was a misstep to have Five's line, "I'm definitely not the man I was." That's the sort of thing that could get people talking. But other than that, I really loved that little sequence, and it felt all of a sudden like everything that we've seen was all part of the continuity of Doctor Who. It felt like a love letter to the series, and it was a nice thing to see as a fan. So I suppose it's probably time to wrap this up and to say that the story in the engine, I thought, was possibly the best episode of this season so far. It's got a bit of a strong contention. The Well was very good. Lucky Day was very good as well. But something about this was just on a slightly different level in terms of the writing, in terms of the performances. It just felt a little bit more polished, I suppose. And this is what happens when you get new writers into Doctor Who perhaps haven't had all of their ideas already crushed and already used and up. It was great and I enjoyed it, and I'll be watching it again on transmission because it was so good. So overall, very impressed with this episode, and I want to see more like that. I want to see more episodes where we get challenged a little bit more, where we don't have everything spoon-fed to us, because that's what happened here. Okay, we got a little bit of spoon-feeding, but not as much as that we've had on so many other stories so far. So let's have more of that, please. That's what I think about this episode. Do let me know what you think about the episode in the comments below, and your thoughts are very important to me, so do please go and comment. I do read them all, even if I don't have time to comment on all of them. And until next time, thanks ever so much for coming along, and do join next week, where we're going to be going to the Intergalactic Song Contest. We'll see at least some singing. We'll see some thing else. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to get next week, but it should be fun, and it should be a little bit camp, and it should do that thing that Doctor Who does quite well. We'll find out next time as we go Beyond the Sofa.